Hello, everybody, and welcome back to IT Ethics and Law at the University of North America. So this week we'll be talking about intellectual property, right? So we come across the long-running series Game of Thrones, right, which was the most frequently pirated television show in the world. Can you imagine it? Some Game of Thrones phrases you may have heard. I am the fire that burns against the cold, and the night is dark and full of terrors, and winter is coming, right? Okay, that's my best interpretation, but wildly popular. And so in an effort to reduce piracy, HBO tried to simulcast the premiere episode of Season 5 in 170 countries around the world. However, can you believe it? The day before it was aired, the first 4 episodes became available. So is it fair for some people to watch shows for free when others are paying to view them, right? This is a conversation about intellectual privacy. So these are some of the topics that we'll be covering over the next couple of lectures this week, and the context centers around those key questions on the HBO scenario just mentioned. Now, as society, we can all say that we benefit from access to high-quality shows like the HBO series, right? And the value of these intellectual properties is much higher than the cost of the actual media that's delivering them. So in this chapter, we'll discuss how information technology is affecting our notion of intellectual property. So intellectual property rights is our first stop on this IT train of ethics and law this week. So intellectual property, defined as any unique product of the human intellect that has commercial value. So we want to distinguish between intellectual property and its physical manifestation. For example, if a poet writes a poem, a new poem, then the poem itself is the intellectual property, not the paper the poem was written on. So the most of the world has widely accepted the notion that people have a right to their own property. So we're going to discuss that in a moment and then try and translate that to intellectual property, right? So property rights. There's this guy from England named John Locke. He lived until about 1700 or so. 1704, I think the book said. And he developed an influential theory of property rights in the British Empire. So Locke makes the following case for a natural right to property, right? So to Locke, the first, people have a right to property in their own person. Secondly, people have a right to their own labor. So you have a right to property as a person, and you have a right to your own labors, right? The fruits of it. And third, people have a right to those things they have removed from nature through their own labor. And they give an example in the book of chopping a tree down, right? So Locke's approach is good to explain how virtually unlimited resources are apportioned, but that's really the rub. It is less useful when there are limited resources available. So to Locke, this was all true as long as 2 conditions held. First, that no person claims more property than he or she can use. And secondly, when people remove something from the common state in order to make it their own property, there is still plenty left over for others. And of course, those conditions are going to limit our ability to apply this in a bigger picture in intellectual property. So the book goes over an analogy of, Shakespeare writes Hamlet, but then this person named Ben maybe writes Hamlet, right? This is all to emphasize that Locke's view of intellectual property isn't a perfect analogy when it comes when we transition from the physical state of whatever we've created from our labor to this intellectual state, right? You can read the Shakespearean analogy yourself in the texts on page about 165 to 167. It's a couple of pages. Very interesting. But basically, Shakespeare writes Hamlet, right? So we agree that Shakespeare has a right to own Hamlet, right? He mixed his labor with raw resources of the English language, right? And he has then a right to decide who will perform the work, a right to require others to pay him if they want to use his work, etc. But imagine on the same night, Ben Jonson also writes Hamlet. Well, that creates a paradox, right? Two people labored independently and produced a single artifact. Now what do we do? There isn't two separate artifacts. There's also another option, right? A second paradox has to do with copying the intellectual property. So say Shakespeare had a few pints, left the pub, left his Hamlet manuscript there. Ben finds it in the morning, finds it interesting, copies it, leaves with his own copy, not the original, right? Now we talk about stealing. Stealing the essence of intellectual property is quite different from stealing a physical object. So when you steal someone's car, they can't drive it anymore. When you steal someone's joke, both of you can tell it. I know I've made a living out of stealing other people's jokes. In fact, here's one that I stole. Here's a joke about Elton John. I can't even remember it. Look at me. All right, I'll come back to that joke. So I didn't steal it because I couldn't get it right. But we can argue that there's a natural right. So this idea, this Hamlet, right? We can keep the idea confidential. Then it really is your property if it's confidential. But we cannot perform the play by keeping it confidential, right? So we've got an issue there. So we ask ourselves a question. Is there a natural right to intellectual property? And the point to this whole discussion is that it's basically, there's a natural right to physical property of our labors, but there is no right other than just a weak right to keep an idea confidential. So while you do keep it confidential, you want to ask yourself some questions. Is it fair for someone to watch shows for free while others view them? That's how we started out this conversation. Do entertainers have the right to control who sees and hears a performance of their music? Say you're at a bar and you take a video on your phone and upload it to YouTube, right? So we're going to look at these topics, right? Well, we may also address, is government, are they putting protections on intellectual property? Has the legal system given more rights to the creators of the intellectual property? And are these changes in the best interest of society? Or are politicians catering to special interest groups? That's those some of the things we're going to look at. So there are differences then between the tangible properties and the intangible. So for every intellectual property every intellectual property is a one of a kind. We know that. And secondly, copying intellectual property is different from that just stealing it, right? So some people, though, gladly share their creative energies from intellectual property. And this is going to create some more diversion, right? Benjamin Franklin, who lived until about 1790, he was a good example of this. Most everything he did, he provided free to the public, right? However, most people, you would agree, I think, find the lure of money to be a strong inducement. So even if there's no natural right to intellectual property, a society can choose to grant this intellectual property rights to people because of the beneficial consequences. And even the Constitution addresses this. Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution already recognizes this when it says of the government that it is to, quote, promote the progress of science and useful arts, the exclusive right, end quote. So there's this tension between the need to reward the creators of intellectual property by giving them exclusive rights to their ideas, and also the need to disseminate these ideas as widely as possible for the good of society. So we should work a compromise, right? And basically what we've done is granted authors and inventors exclusive rights to their writings and discoveries, but only for a limited period of time. So the question is, now what is a reasonable length of time, right? So we take the song in the book, it mentions Happy Birthday to You, right? We've all sung it. This is the most popular song in the world. And have you ever wondered why you almost never hear it on TV? That's because TV networks previously had to pay every time it was sung on TV. In 2015, the U.S. District Court ruled against Warner Music Group, which owned the rights to the song, that it does not own a valid copyright to Happy Birthday. And this decision, if not overturned, the song will remain in the public domain. So currently it's in the public domain, though it continues to go back and forth. And what does the public domain do for you? Well, you can see by this chart the impact on prices. So who benefits? Society benefits. It can be purchased, not just a Happy Birthday song, but anything for much, much less than was originally sold for when it goes into the public domain. So that benefits the common good, right? So we have this tug. So we want to think about protecting intellectual property. And there are 4 different ways in which individuals or organizations protect their intellectual property. That's trade secrets, trademarks or service marks, patents, and copyrights. Now, a trade secret provides companies a competitive advantage, right? To be effective, a trade secret protection policy should include a uniform system for making secret documents. It should include the name of the trade secret owner, and that document should be confidential since, of course, it contains trade secrets. And that disclosure strictly prohibited. There are actually many trade secrets out there, more than you might think. Kentucky Fried Chicken's secret blend of 11 herbs and spices. Coca-Cola, which the book talks about, their recipe for their signature Coke drink. Google's search algorithm. McDonald's Big Mac special sauce, and etc. Even you might even include secret client list at any company, right? So a company like Coke, they transferred the secret formula from a vault at SunTrust Bank in downtown Atlanta. It had been there since 1925. And the move of the Coca-Cola secret formula, it was a historic moment for the company. It's still a secret. Now it's kept in their own vault. They don't even trust the public bank, right? Trademark and service mark, right? Trademark identifies goods. Service mark identifies services. And a company through this can establish a brand name which does not expire. But you must be careful. If a brand name becomes a common noun, the trademark can be lost. Kleenex or Band-Aid are good examples, right? That's one reason you hear, we are stuck on Band-Aid brand, because they are trying to emphasize it is their brand name, right? Interesting. I'm sure that jingle just went by most of us, but that's the meaning behind it. So while it is illegal to steal a trade secret, there are other ways that confidentiality can be broken. It is legal actually to reverse engineer a product, right? So know that a trademark starts out as a good idea and becomes a word, a picture, a sound, a color used by a business to identify goods. But it can be lost, okay? We'll come back with the patent right after this short break.